Welcome and thank you for your interest in Watermark Search and also in terms of working as an interim executive with us. My name is Lisa McAuliffe and I'm a partner here in the interim practice here in Sydney. And today I'm joined by Caroline McAuliffe, also a partner here in the interim practice in Sydney. The purpose of today's presentation is to give you an overview of the interim executive market and also how we work at Watermark Search. Hopefully this will answer some of your questions if you're just considering working in this space. So we'll start today with why Watermark Search. Well, we actually have the largest dedicated interim executive practice here in Australia. We were established now over 10 years ago. Caroline McAuliffe actually established the practice then, and has been working hard year on year to educate the market in terms of how valuable interim executive resources are. We are growing quite rapidly. Obviously, we're behind in terms of the activity that's happening in the UK, but it's certainly a growing market here in Australia. And we'll talk to you about that as we move through the presentation. So our focus is solely on meeting clients' requirements around shorter term placements. We work at C-suite level and the level below across both public and private sectors. So we work across all industries, from not-for-profits right through to ASX listed organisations at those levels. We execute over 250 interim assignments each year across those sectors. And aside from our interim practice, we also have a very strong search practice who also focus on those areas, as well as a highly successful board practice here in Australia. So in terms of today's agenda, we're going to talk to you about what's happened since COVID hit back in March and give you an update there. We'll talk about the growth of the interim executive market in Australia and how that's travelled over the last 10 years. We'll also focus on what makes a successful interim executive, so what you need to do and how you can help yourself be successful in this field. We'll have a look at the interim market and do a review of our practice, and also talk to some last quarter's case studies, which I think will be of interest to you in terms of the types of roles that we've been working on and why there's been a need for those roles. So we'll give you an update on those, as well as some of the Watermark's product offerings that have come out of the interim practice here in Australia. So what's happened since COVID hit? Well, goodness, I don't think anyone was expecting what's happened over the last 6, 7, 8 months now. We, like everybody else, went into lockdown back in March and worked from home. And thankfully, all our systems were in place. And it was quite a seamless transaction, really, or transition, I should say. As you would imagine, search slowed down and came to a bit of a halt. You know, as expected, as people were sort of going into that triage period and really focusing on looking after their teams and their team's well-being and also systems. Interim continued to carry on through, and we continued to assist businesses throughout COVID. And obviously in that crisis scenario, many of our interim executives were engaged in crisis management teams and boards to work across, you know, what was happening in that point in time. What was also interesting was that the people that we had out on assignments actually all remained in their contracts, in their positions. None of them lost their contracts. In fact, some of them were extended and some of them were actually converted into permanent positions. So I think that just goes to show you the caliber of people that are out there now and the integral roles that they were playing within their organizations. I think that comes with the wealth of experience that they have, the strategic experience, the leadership experience that they have, and also, you know, crisis management experience. I think it's fair to say that, you know, the interim executives that we have out there with their stellar careers, they've almost all of them have been through crisis management experience or, you know, had experience in the past where they've been in the trenches and they have the war stories. So it would enable them to come to the party in terms of having a cool head and moving forward. So as I mentioned previously, Watermark Search, in terms of the interim space, has had extensive growth over the last 10 years. In fact, it's been a five-fold increase year on year. And rather than being the baby brother or sister of the business some years ago, we now account for 50% of the overall business here at Watermark. This year, we've celebrated the release of our 10th annual Interim survey, and which I'll talk to shortly. But this is a piece of research that we've conducted every year since our inception, and that has actually shown a 30% uplift in respondents this year, which I think goes to show the growth within the interim executive market and the increase in the number of people that are working in this way and choosing to work in this way.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline McAuliffe. Again, as Lisa mentioned, I'm her partner here in the interim practice at Watermark in Sydney. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the growth in the interim executive market here in Australia and what has been driving that across the world, actually. So we all know that the executive market, like so many others, has become more contingent. We quite often hear about the rise of the gig economy and the contingent workforce, and that is a big driver of the environment that we now find ourselves in, along with a change in demographic at executive level. When you think about the generations who have been the baby boomer generation and X generation, who have now reached what was traditional retirement age, potentially, but absolutely no longer contemplating retirement in the traditional way and wanting to work onwards in a third career, second career, as a portfolio professional, and interim executive plays a large part of that. So we've seen the change in the contingent workforce, the way people are working, and also in the demographics. So there is a big supply now of executives who are wanting to work more flexibly, and that has reached our shores in Australia. There has been a prevalence for lean management teams also, particularly post-recession. When you think about the GFC and wanting to drive down cost in a business, we saw a lot of organisational redesign. And what's happened there is, if I show you a diagram here that was put together by Deloitte, you'll see there that the traditional post-industrial era of, the hierarchy has absolutely shifted to the way things are into a more matrix-driven organisational structure. And now how things work today is that more agile workforce dynamic where you have small agile teams working. So when you pull all those drivers together, you're finding that there's been a growth, therefore, in the supply of great interim executives who want to work this way, but also organisations who are now looking to deploy that talent into their businesses to fill gaps, to affect turnaround and change. There is a video that we've pulled together here. Our partner Jacinta Whelan in Melbourne has pulled this together, and I think this actually sums up very nicely what I've just tried to explain in 2 minutes. So we're going to play you that video now.
The rise of the portfolio career and how businesses can benefit from this. To see the future of work, first you have to understand how business is rapidly changing and evolving. Let's explore 3 mega trends that are changing the way we work. 1, organisational structures. 2, let's look at the contingent workforce. And 3, let's look at demographics and how that's changing how we work. Business used to be shaped like a pyramid. The command and control industrial era structures were made up of workers, managers and executives, but a global marketplace has changed that. In order to stay competitive, companies have evolved and implemented structural change. Those changes range from outsourcing to offshoring to cost cutting and process improvement and digitalisation. The organisational pyramid is now more of a rocket ship shape. Organisations are utilising contingent workers as the boosters of that rocket. These workers augment a company's workforce and help it determine how far the company will go. The second factor to explore is a global trend towards a more contingent workforce. The Australian ASX companies have gone from 15% contingent workers in 2016 to 30% by 2020. We're quickly catching up to the US and Europe, where the numbers are even higher. The third mega trend occurring that affects how we work is demographics, particularly the baby boomer cohort. So the dual forces of organisations restructuring and demographics have collided at this point in time, and that's really changed the game. The baby boomers are the largest population group, and market forces have created an opportunity for these baby boomers to stay engaged in meaningful work longer. This additional supply of workers at an executive level is leading to a change in how we all work. This intersection point of excess supply of people at the executive level and leaner organisations has created a new offering, the portfolio professional. Watermark Interim Management specialises in meeting the supply and demand of the contingent workforce and those who choose a portfolio career. For nearly 10 years, Watermark has led the way in this increasingly popular way of working, for employers and employees to engage. We have unmatched expertise in placing interim executives into leadership roles in the public and private sectors. People who embrace a portfolio career tell us that they're at the next phase of their career. The common themes of what they tell us are that the kids have grown, the school fees are paid, the mortgage is under control. Along the way, this group have earned a wealth of knowledge and they really want to use that, but they'd like to do it a little bit more on their terms. They're now choosing a portfolio career that comprises of interim roles, as well as other revenue streams and lifestyle changes. Businesses are increasingly using these portfolio professionals to deliver results in today's competitive market. These portfolio professionals, combined with the changes in organisational structures, are redefining how the workforce looks. Are you ready to take off? We are. Contact us today to see how your organisation can tap into the power of a portfolio professional.
Yes, I think that explains that very clearly in simple terms. So I hope that was useful for you. I'm now going to move on to our 10th interim annual executive survey and just share the findings with you. So some of the highlights that have come out of this year's survey are listed here. One of the respondents actually came up with the phrase that they see interim executive as the offering as being the panacea for a pandemic, which is fantastic. We think it explains it really well, and so we've been using that as we move forward. But it really is, if we look at COVID, it really is driving the demand for interim executives. If we look back to pre-COVID, and as I said, we were having its day before, well, now it's been accelerated into the future. So what we've seen, some of the key highlights that have come out of the survey this year is that there's been a 23% growth in C-suite interim assignments. So if we look back over the last couple of years, we were, probably looking at roles that were around that sort of GM level or program manager level. But I think the growth in C-suite interim assignments really reflects on perhaps how the perception of interim has changed, and the fact that organizations can see the value and the caliber of the people that are working in this space now. We've also seen, as no surprise, a 25% spike in demand for interims with IT and digital and data skills. And, that comes with the amount of change and transformation that's happening in today's market. And I think probably the rise of the C-suite there also comes with roles such as Chief Digital Officer, Chief Data Officer, and also, around that Chief Experience Officer, as organizations look at how consumers are behaving and how they need to change in terms of, operating and working with their customers and the consumer. We've seen a big increase in demand for chief risk officers, and I think that really comes off the back of the Royal Commission over the last couple of years. There's been a demand for risk, compliance, governance, a lot of roles in that space, and I think that's going to continue on as, again, with COVID. As companies reinvent themselves and their operations, they're having to look at their frameworks, their risk frameworks. So that's going to continue. In terms of the need, what's needed is that deep functional expertise that's always in demand. And interestingly enough, when we ask the question around, well, you know, do you think there's going to be a greater demand for interims going forward? Whopping 94% of respondents said that they thought there would be. And I think we're hearing that as we're moving out, having more and more conversations with our clients. That is the general feel, that interim executives are the panacea for a pandemic. Okay, so the theme that's come out of this year's survey is reinvention, and that's when we look at transformation, disruption. It's, you know, reinvention, and how are the executives, how are organizations responding to this? We've underpinned that by 3 pillars, and what we're calling the 3 E's, and that's the executive, so that's the person who's actually doing the job, the interim executive themselves. So, you know, what can they bring to the table? What drives them? It's the experience. So what's required by the clients? So that's the assignment. What functional areas are in demand? What sectors are in demand? And then we look at the environment. So what's created the need for interim executives these days? So if we look at the executive, there are 3 main things that an interim executive can bring to an organization that's of value. And that's that deep functional experience in their field of expertise, and leadership experience as one of them. So leadership is called upon more than ever now, a certain type of leadership. It's that strong leadership with communication skills, but also empathy. You're looking at leaders now. We need leaders that it's not business as usual. It's moving forward, it's moving through change, and it's communicating that change to a remote workforce more often than not. But what our executives can bring is that leadership, but also execution focus and speed of delivery. So it's about going in, diagnosing what needs to be done, and finding a remedy really quickly. So a lot of the assignments we have, well, you know, the majority of them, there's issues to be fixed, there's problems to be solved. So it's having that mindset of being a problem solver, a fixer. You have a remit to go in, and there's a finite period of time generally to get things done. So it's moving at speed, it's having that agility of thought, and being able to navigate the politics, and having that strong stakeholder engagement. Now you see there we mentioned superpowers. So when we talk about superpowers here at Watermark, it's around what can you bring to the table that makes you different from the next person. And as I've just touched on there, the key things that interim executives can bring, and why clients want to bring them in, is because they've got that stakeholder engagement. As I say, they can navigate the politics quickly, the communication, and the transformation and change. But I'll touch on the superpowers shortly, but it's really important that you are clear in regards to what you can bring, what is your value proposition. So what makes you stand out from the next person. What we're finding now with interim executives, it's not necessarily just about the contract type. So where in the past, I think, you know, we still have interim executives that are choosing purely to have a portfolio career. That's changing, that's shifting slightly. More and more people are open to the type of work, whether it is a consulting opportunity, an interim opportunity, or now a permanent opportunity. And whether that's sort of delivered in regards to daily rates or fixed term or however it is, it's more important to our interim executives that it adds value to their functional expertise, their deep functional expertise. It brings them variety, and more often than not, the opportunity to move across different industries. So they're looking for variety there. What's important, however, is that you remain relevant. So in terms of using your time to upskill, to be across your area of expertise, to build your knowledge, to network, and have that continuous learning mindset, which you can have by reading, attending webinars, engaging with your peers, being across LinkedIn. It's really important that you remain relevant to stay ahead of the curve. And I think, you know, seeing that big shift that I mentioned earlier in terms of digital and technology and data experience, if there's one area that you feel that you're lacking, and potentially, and that is it, I would suggest that you upskill there, because that is needed more than ever now. And I think it's no longer a case of saying, oh, I get by in that area. You have to be across it, and you have to be digitally savvy. So what can you do in order to be successful as an interim executive? Well, you'll be sent a checklist from us, which will, you know, go through some points in terms of, you know, what you need to be successful as an interim executive. Will it suit you? Is it right for you? It's a thought-provoking exercise that I would encourage you to work through and just see, you know, whether this is the right area for you to work in. Potentially, if not now, then it's something you may want to consider down the track. So have a look at your superpowers. What are they? What makes you different from the next person? It's not easy often to talk about ourselves or to blow our own trumpets, as you would say, but perhaps sort of think about, well, how would my peers describe me? If my peers were to pick up the phone tomorrow and ask me to come in and do a piece of work, what would they call me for? Is it around my, you know, strategy experience? Is it around my execution, implementation? What is it I bring to the table? You need to relate that back to real life examples of what you've done. So it's clear in terms of, you know, what you have done in the past, how did you do it, and what were the results? Now, around having a value proposition, it's around being able to verbalize what you can do, but it's also around continuing that through all your touch points. So verbalizing it, having it shine through in your resume, and having it shine through on LinkedIn as well. So you might want to have a resume, but also another one pager, just looking at your value proposition. And you might split that up into maybe 3 or 4 streams. What can you bring to the table? And there's 5 points here that you might find useful to think about. So it's around identifying your target audience. So who, you know, who would appreciate your experience? Is it a particular sector? Is it finance? Is it HR? And understanding, well, what are they going through now? Especially now, what are their pain points? And what can I do to alleviate those pain points? What is unique about me that I can bring to, you know, ease that pain and add value, and connect that value to those pain points across, as I say, verbally delivering that speech to your network, to potential employers, across your resume, across LinkedIn, and being very clear and articulate in that offering.
So in terms of the experience part of the pillar, we're talking there about, you know, gathering that data from our annual report and how it relates to what the clients are looking for from an interim executive. So what we found in the results was there's been a shift to the C-suite. I think Lisa mentioned that earlier. So rather than what's always been in demand was the you know, good program director, good general manager, and even good EGM. There's been a real true shift to C-suite appointments at an interim level. So I think what that does is, quite rightly, Lisa, you know, it reflects that there's been a genuine recognition by organisations that the people who are on our bench, who are ready to work now, the value of those people. I mean, they're really the brains trust of Australia that we have there ready to be deployed. They have 25, 30 years experience in C-suite, on the ground, sleeves rolled up. They've been there, they've done it. And so they're very seasoned. And, you know, in the past, perhaps you might not have had access to that type and level of experience, but you certainly do now. And so that's been good to see that shift to the true C-suite assignment. There's been a 25% increase year on year in digital and the demand for digital experience. So there's no surprise there. And I think Lisa mentioned before, you know, there's this shift to, if you didn't have your digital roadmap down pat before, COVID and the pandemic has actually amplified that need now, particularly where it joins and comes together with the customer experience. And so no surprise there that there's been an increase in demand for digital expertise. Talked about customer experience. You know, we've all seen the move online as consumers. Where do we get our joy now? We get it from making an order online and waiting for the postman to arrive. So again, organisations who have already had their online businesses ready and waiting and ready to go have actually seen an uplift in sales and demand since COVID. And those that were not ready for this and unprepared are busily trying to get up to speed now. So we're going to see a continuing demand in that space. Look, rates have maintained. And when we talk about rates, we talk about the daily rate that we would agree with you. And it's commensurate with the level of expertise required, the brief, you know, the criteria, but generally we start at around $1,000 a day, which is the equivalent annualized of about 225,000 annualized salary level, and we would go to up to around 3,000. But as a rule, our average day rate is maintaining around the $1,500 per day mark. The assignments that are in demand at the moment and what we're delivering at the moment really do have that core transformation requirement. Of course they do. You know, this is the reinvention theme. We need to reimagine, reinvent, and be future-proofing our businesses right now for what is the new now. And so what we're seeing there is we're delivering interim executive expertise in cost out and right sizing. And so a lot of demand there for finance and HR skill sets. And as I mentioned, digital is definitely on the rise and will continue, as is risk and governance. And with risk, of course, you know, off the back of Royal Commissions, but now in a financial respect, but now even more so in the human aspect and respect. So how do we put in a good framework for our human resources and ensure that going forward that their wellness and well-being of our people, that we have a good risk framework. I mean, no one knew that COVID was going to happen, right? And we were all underprepared. And so now for the future, we must be prepared to continue to, you know, shore up our risks in our businesses on that basis. It has become a more competitive environment. So as Lisa mentioned, networking is key. It's something that you should be doing every day. Your own personal and professional network, you need to keep fresh, staying connected with, and create a new network and broaden your network, because almost certainly most of your assignments will come from your personal and professional networks. There is a trust in bringing in someone at this level into an organization that you will have built in your past relationships and past working with organizations, with people. And I think it's very important that you keep your networking as part of your daily routine. It really is that important. Some of the biggest challenges that came through in the report from our participants there in the report were that, you know, interim executives struggle with the consistency of work. And of course, layered on top of that now is the more competitive nature. There has been a steady flow through of great executives who have been victim, unfortunately, to COVID and the pandemic, downsizing. And so more and more, you know, we need to take heed to the advice that Lisa gave regarding you networking, but also, you know, articulating your superpowers and your value proposition very clearly, so that you stand out from the crowd. And the other biggest challenge for interim executives is the promotion of oneself. So learning how to self-promote, and, you know, it's all about brand me now, not necessarily the brand you've been working for. So you know, there is some learning and development in that. You know, we're all not ones to self-promote, but you must try and, you know, learn how to do that and do it well, and ensure that your brand and that you're more visible than ever before in the right forums. And, you know, in particular, LinkedIn would be a forum that, you know, you should, in terms of social media, be active on and be commenting on and be seen out there. So those were the, you know, the outcomes of the report in terms of the experience. In terms of the environment, well, no surprises, you know, unprecedented lockdown, work from home. You know, we went into triage. We're through that now, I feel. Although in Victoria, unfortunately, they're still struggling with that, although looking like it's heading in the right direction. However, you know, it's all been first thought about health and well-being of our people, of course. That's exactly our first thought. We've been through that triage, and we continued as a firm to place executives to shore up that expertise that was required in that triage period. Next phase now, absolutely, it's all about reinvention, reimagining. You know, what does the future hold for our organisation? How do we future-proof our business going forward? And so those are the conversations that are happening at board and executive level. So I would imagine that, and I know for a fact that that's where our interim executives can really add value in those conversations, and in fact, the strategy of it, but also the delivery and execution of it. It's great that we are all in this together right now, and it will make, if one good thing comes out of this, it will be, you know, that we can make a better world and a better, more flexible workplace for people. And I think that the fact we're all in this together makes for really open and transparent conversations. And we all have great ideas about what that might look like for us all. But there's nothing like putting our heads together right now. And because we don't have all the answers, but having that very transparent conversations, and we're going to be actually facilitating some of those going into the future. So that's, we want to be part of that conversation going forward. We do think there's going to be new approaches to hiring and probably more flexible career paths, you know, less linear, probably a more interim type flexible placement. And the areas where we see a need in functionally, you know, across supply chains that were impacted, and digital again, also the cultural aspect of this change. You know, how do we engage and continue to engage a workforce that is now pretty much dispersed, and ensure that, you know, that we all feel still part of a culture. And also, you know, that whole idea of customer experience and the way consumers are now buying and can choose who they work or who they spend their money with, basically. So that's really important. Yeah, and the whole remote working teams, that's a whole different webinar in its own right, and how we're all going to manage that. So biggest changes in the workplace of the future were obviously the social and economic impact and change, and again, the remote working and how digital plays its part in all of that. So look, there's still work to be done by us in ensuring that clients are fully aware of our service, and that's our primary focus right now, is to get in front and speak with as many of our clients and prospective clients as possible, to ensure that they're fully aware that they have access to an amazing quality group of people who are now available to work in this more flexible way. So we're very focused on that. And yes, absolutely, it's a no-brainer really. It just means that interim could be a very good solution right now. You know, when you think about the dynamics out there in terms of border closures, the ability for us to be able to provide instant talent on the ground interstate when you can't get on a plane any longer and deal with issues and problems as they arise interstate. I think that's, again, you know, another area that we will be working in going forward. The skills gaps of the future that we identified through our report was, that true need for executive leadership. And it is it's not a new leadership, but it might be a different type of leadership. When I talk about that, it's about, the empathy, the transparency, and the really strong communication from the CEO and the executive to their teams. And, even with this way that we're interacting now on Zoom, all of us are now opening our homes. We're all working at home. And so you can now, everyone now in your team can clearly see who you are, and it's making for more authentic conversations and more authentic communication style with people. So gaps again at the C-suite, there's definitely a shift there to C-suite, true interim C-suite. And I think that's come about potentially because, COVID has highlighted that perhaps that the right skills and experience for that future leadership isn't currently there. And so there's a shift to bring in some of that skill and experience that we have sitting on the bench. Finance and of course IT, digital is also those areas for gaps for the future that we're hoping to fill. At the moment, we've asked organisations, how are you currently covering this crisis? And about 50% came back to talk about the fact that they're redeploying their existing staff. Now, that is fraught with danger in that, the last thing we want to do at the moment is to be overloading people that are already, on staff and probably, have been under the pump and under crisis conditions. And so we encourage organisations to really think about, utilising the interim resourcing option right now to fill those gaps and bring some help to teams that are potentially overloaded. So the greatest sector need we found in our results was, of course, human services and health was at the top of the list, along with FMCG and retail. We've all seen them step up in this crisis period. And of course, government, where all the policy and all of the, payments and JobKeeper and so on has been, we've had to scramble in government to actually, pull all that together to ensure that we're sustainable. There's a great article that we featured in the AFR 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Sally Patton, the journalist, jumped on to our survey results and wrote a really good story there and featured 2 very seasoned interim executives, and they told their story about their experience in being an interim executive. And so I feel what we'll do there is we'll also send you a link to that if you're interested in registering.
Thanks, Caroline. So as Caroline said, our focus is on business development. So that's what we're focusing on, is getting as many roles in, obviously, as possible. But just to give you some background, we are generalists. So we do work across, obviously, multiple industries, but multiple functional areas. So while we would love to find everybody a job, as Caroline said, your focus must always be on networking. So ideally, if you're working in this space, you'll be picking up pieces of work through people like ourselves, but also through your own network. You'll uncover opportunities there. But just some stats there, which may be of interest to you in regards to the number of client meetings we had, business development meetings over the last year, in the year in review, and that's across both Sydney and Melbourne. And then also the number of registration meetings there that we had also. And that continues to grow. And as I say, we continue to push out and do as much business development as we can continuously. But for us, it's a ongoing relationship. So the idea is that, if you decide to register with us, you're then on our radar and we will reach out wherever we can. If we look back at the year in review in terms of the assignments we've had, we had 100 roles briefed, and the current daily rates, Caroline mentioned previously, was on average 1,500 a day. Now, there are some clients that prefer to work on fixed term contracts, but generally 9 times out of 10, it's daily rates that we work with. If we look at the average length of contract, you're looking there around the sort of 8.5 month average length of contract there. These are some of the roles across the sectors that we've been briefed in the year July 2009 to June 2020. So you can see it's a broad range of sectors there. And if we move in closely, you'll see the top sectors that we've worked in around health, insurance, education, construction. Again, government's up there, as Caroline was saying. We anticipate as we go forward the likes of FMCG coming through as new sectors will come into demand. Just to give you an idea of how we operate, if we receive a brief, it's a very quick turnaround for us. So there's always a crisis situation. It's generally that we're called upon because the need was for yesterday, and it happens really quickly. So if a role comes through, we will reach out to you, get a shortlist together, and we can have that back to the client within 48 hours. So it's pretty quick. So there are some of the functional areas that we work across. It's over the last year and probably longer, Chief Financial Officer, Chief People Officer, Finance, HR, those spaces tend to be top of the ladder. But obviously there's been a spike, as we were saying earlier, in technology. So be interesting to see whether that shifts slightly. Here we are again with some stats in regards to Watermark Search as a whole. So we've been around now for over 40 years, and with over 5,000 executive searches and interim placements completed, there's some interesting numbers there. And to put that into perspective, if we take the role of a CEO, we've actually placed a CEO every 4 weeks over the course of 40 years, and a CFO of every 3 weeks over the course of 40 years. So that just goes to show you the history we have and the relationships we have in place. I think it's fair to say we've had people coming through looking for roles that have then become clients, and then now potentially have moved into the interim space. So they're very much long-standing relationships. Here, which may be of interest to you, we've got some case studies, and these case studies we've undertaken over the last quarter. I can talk to 2 of those, and Caroline, I'll let you talk to one. I'm just going to address the interim CFO in the banking sector there. We received a brief from a financial services client who were going through a lot of change and transformation and a lot of regulatory scrutiny at the time. And they needed to deploy an interim CFO very quickly. We identified somebody in that case, and we had a brief. We responded to the brief 1 week after receiving it. And in fact, that person did in fact convert to a permanent position, interestingly enough. The second one I'll address is the interim brand marketing comms executive. Now, this was for a law firm who had recently been joined by a new CEO, and they were going through a whole brand change and redesign, and were heading out both well, internally and externally to the market with the overall brand redesign, and also looking at the brand of the incoming CEO. So again, identified, reached out to our cohort of interim executives, had a shortlist to them very quickly, and executed that brief within a week.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And the interim CFO that has been the case study there was for an organisation in gaming, media and entertainment. And what happened there was the CFO, the incumbent, had left the role with immediate effect. And that's quite often the case, you know, when we get the call, is the unexpected can happen for whatever reason, whether it be illness or unfortunately due to performance or dismissal. And so that's when, you know, with all good faith, you might have a succession plan in place, or working on that internally, but there will be times where you don't. And so therefore the ability to be able to call us and have a identified interim CFO in place within 2 to 4 days is really, I think, a benefit to any organisation. Quick review there, the interim head of HR for the government-owned corporation. That was for an insurance business that are actually a government-owned corporation, however. But that person that they needed was someone with specific experience in insurance, governance and risk. They had a new executive director put in place, and he wanted someone to come and work hand in hand with him to develop the new leadership framework. And they also were going through an overall functional restructuring. So again, we placed an interim head of HR with all of that very deep insurance sector expertise, but also deep governance and risk functional expertise. So that was a great result there. Below that, we had placed an interim head of IT operations for a university. Again, we deployed head of IT ops during a time of enormous change and transformation for that IT team in the university. And so they required, again, this is where you need to get your value proposition right with us so that we're aware, because again, there was a need for very specific subject matter expertise, including cybersecurity requirement there, and also bring experience in transformation and a depth of knowledge to the IT based on where they were at in their transformation journey. So that was that one. Interim program manager, again, a HR lead for, again, a very insurance specific project. So again, we need to look to who might be available immediately. That's usually the first thing that we are asked to do, because they'll want you tomorrow. So there is that need to understand your availability, and that's why we stay in touch with you once you're registered, if you do register with us, to ensure that you do have immediate availability. And then we then have to go deeper and more granular with, you know, yes, you are a HR executive, but do you have specific experience in insurance sector? And do you have very specific projects expertise in a very particular part of an insurance organisation? So it can get that granular. And yes, I think that was the other one you're going to address there.
Yes, absolutely. So the last one being the interim state logistics director role. So this was within the business services sector. This was a company going through crisis. They had gone through a merger potentially a year before that had its challenges, and it was a particularly busy time of year, a critical time of year, where they needed somebody in place to manage the operational and logistics side of the business. So again, this person had to go in. They had been a layer of management go. So it was very much around managing that stakeholder management, navigating those politics, and getting the job done, being a fixer. And again, place this person within a week of the assignment being briefed.
Just going to talk to you very quickly about some new service offerings that we have developed at Watermark, and they've really been born out of the interim practice as it's grown over the last 10 years. Something we pride ourselves on is the way we can flex and the way that we think innovatively about what is it that our clients require right now from us. And so the fact that we have a very strong search arm as well as interim arm has, we thought about, you know, how can we almost integrate that, all the benefits of both, and pull together a service offering for clients that is meeting a need for them right now. We came up with the Total Executive Search Solution, or TESS. And basically what that is the fact that a client at any one time might need an interim executive almost immediately to fill a gap whilst they conduct a search. So searches can take, as we all know, 3 to 6 months, if not longer, sometimes to complete a search. And then even when you do complete it, you might have a 3-month notice period waiting for that successful candidate to start in their new role. So what we've talked to clients about is, get your interim executive in tomorrow, which we can provide in 24, 48 hours. That person will sit in the chair in a very dynamic caretaking way, manage the team and ensure that any project that's key at the time is seen through, and we don't drop any balls on that. But also part of what their remit can be to actually inform the search partners on what are the real gap areas potentially in the role. What are you really looking for? Because they are actually in the seat, so they'll be able to inform on the search. And do we need to, uplift a need in a certain functional area, or what we're looking for from the new permanent hire? What is it we're actually needing there? And that's a really great way to inform a search when you have someone actually working in the role itself. The search will then continue. We will find somebody on a permanent basis. The interim is still there, and then at the end of that process, the interim will hand over to the permanent incoming executive and provide them with a very independent and informed onboarding to actually set them up for success as they work through their first 90 days in an organisation. So we feel that's a very compelling solution. What it does is it allows you not to focus on the speed at which you want to get someone in the chair on a permanent basis. It allows you the quality time to actually get it right the first time. So that's Total Executive Search Solution. The other service offering is Key Person Risk Initiative. And this is very much grown out of the interim practice because we now have over 5,000 portfolio professionals registered, and that number keeps rising. These are people genuinely who have chosen this way of working ongoing. They're not looking for their next permanent role. So this allows us to go to boards and exec teams and talk about potentially an insurance policy, really. Again, as I mentioned, organisations will absolutely have their own succession planning in place. But again, if you want more assurance that a key person in your team will be covered and you have immediate cover for that person should something happen during the next 12 months, why they won't be in that role, and to cover, particularly regulatory requirements such as a chief risk officer role or CFO. What we will do is we'll map that role for you with our named portfolio professionals available, who will be available to you if you need to invoke that key person risk initiative contract that you have with us. And that's refreshed every quarter. So that's again of interest to boards and executives where, executive teams where, in particular where it gives you competitive advantage as well. So we will only work with one organisation per sector. If we have a contract with an organisation, you'll be the only organisation in your sector who will have the benefit of having this extra assurance. So that kind of covers off the new service offerings, and that really does conclude this presentation. We hope that it's answered some of your questions as to, is interim executive for me? Does it, do I tick a lot of those check boxes? And we'd encourage you to have a real good think about the superpowers and the value proposition. Please feel free. We'll have already probably had contact with Suzanne Mulvihill, who's our operations director for the interim practice. If you would like to register, in the first instance, please do send your resume, and also, if you can, your superpowers, you know, having thought about them, and your value proposition, a statement, perhaps as Lisa mentioned, a separate document that we can record and that we have access to, so that we can clearly see what you can offer. Basically, that would be great. So please feel free to contact Suzanne Mulvihill, or if you haven't had contact with Suzanne and would like to register, please use the interim@watermarksearch.com.au email address, which is also available to connect on our website. Thank you for your time. We hope that was helpful, and we wish you all the best as you go forward. Thanks, everyone.